I should have seen it coming when my mother insisted on helping with my medical school applications. For 23 years, she'd perfected the art of undermining my achievements while maintaining plausible deniability. But this time her sabotage would backfire in ways she never imagined. Growing up, I'd learned to hide my successes from my family. When I made honor roll in high school, my mother told relatives I was too focused on grades and needed to develop social skills. When I graduated summa cum laude from my undergraduate program in biochemistry, she explained to the extended family that book smarts didn't translate to real-world competence. When I scored in the 98th percentile on the MC, she worried aloud to anyone who'd listen that I was setting myself up for disappointment. The pattern was always the same. I'd achieve something significant, feel a moment of pride, then watch my mother systematically diminish it. She had a gift for finding the one angle that would make my accomplishments seem either insignificant or concerning. Too academic meant I lacked practical skills. Too driven meant I was obsessive. Too successful meant I was headed for a spectacular fall. During my junior year of college, I'd started documenting these incidents. Not because I planned to use the evidence, but because I was beginning to question my own perception of reality. Was I really as capable as my professor suggested, or was my mother right that I was an anxious perfectionist destined for failure? The documentation helped me see the pattern clearly. Every time I succeeded, she found a way to reframe it as a problem. My pre-med advisor, Dr. Jennifer Walsh, had been encouraging me to apply to top-tier medical schools since my sophomore year. She'd watched me excel in organic chemistry, biochemistry, and molecular biology. I'd worked in her research lab for 2 years, contributing to 3 published papers on cardiac protein synthesis. When I mentioned considering safer schools because my family thought I was aiming too high, Dr. Walsh looked genuinely confused. "Sarah, you have the strongest application I've seen in 15 years of advising," she said during our meeting that fall. "Your research is graduate-level quality, your clinical volunteering shows real commitment to patient care, and your MCT scores put you in the top tier nationally. Why would you limit yourself?" I couldn't explain how my mother's voice had become the default narrator in my head, always ready with reasons why success was temporary, why I was one mistake away from failure, why I needed to manage expectations. Instead, I applied to her recommended schools: Johns Hopkins, Harvard, Stanford, Mayo Clinic, and several other highly competitive programs. The application process was grueling, but I felt confident about my materials. My personal statement detailed my research experience and my passion for cardiothoracic surgery. My letters of recommendation were strong. Dr. Walsh had shown me excerpts describing my work as exceptional and graduate level. My grades and test scores spoke for themselves. That's when my mother offered to help with the family coordination aspect of applications. Many schools, she pointed out, might want to speak with family members as part of their holistic review process. She'd be happy to serve as a reference point if needed. I should have recognized this as a red flag, but I was drowning in interview preparation and grateful for any assistance. The first sign something was wrong came in January. Dr. Walsh called me into her office with a confused expression. She'd been contacted by the admissions office at Johns Hopkins, asking about my emotional stability, and whether she had concerns about my ability to handle the stress of medical training. They said they'd received information from a family member suggesting you might have anxiety disorders that could impact your performance, Dr. Walsh explained. I told them that was completely contrary to everything I'd observed about you. You're one of the most level-headed, resilient students I've worked with. Have you been having any mental health concerns you haven't mentioned? My stomach dropped. I knew immediately what had happened, but I needed proof. That evening, I called Johns Hopkins admissions directly, identifying myself as the applicant in question. The admissions coordinator, Ms. Rodriguez, was professional but clearly concerned. "We received a call from someone identifying herself as your mother," she explained. "She expressed serious concerns about your mental health history and your ability to cope with academic pressure. She mentioned that you'd had several breakdowns during undergraduate studies and that the family was worried about you pursuing such a demanding field." I felt my face flush with anger and humiliation. My mother had never witnessed any breakdowns because I'd never had any. The closest I'd come to a mental health crisis was the anxiety I felt every time she undermined my achievements. "Ma'am, I need you to know that everything my mother told you is false," I said, keeping my voice steady. I've never had a mental health breakdown. I've never been treated for anxiety or depression. I'm happy to provide documentation from my university's counseling center confirming this. My mother has a pattern of sabotaging my achievements, and I have documentation of this behavior going back several years. Ms. Rodriguez was quiet for a moment. That's very concerning on multiple levels. Can you send us that documentation? We'll need to review this situation carefully. I spent the next week compiling evidence. Screenshots of text messages where my mother dismissed my achievements. Email threads where she'd contacted my undergraduate professors expressing concerns about my stress levels. Documentation from my university counseling center showing I'd never sought treatment for anxiety or depression. I'd only attended a few sessions about family relationships, which the counselor noted showed healthy self-awareness, not instability. But the most damning evidence came when I started calling other medical schools. Harvard, Stanford, Mayo Clinic. My mother had contacted all of them. The stories varied slightly but followed the same theme. I was emotionally unstable, prone to anxiety, possibly not suited for the rigors of medical training. At Stanford, she'd claimed I'd been hospitalized for a nervous breakdown, completely false. At Harvard, she'd suggested I had obsessive-compulsive tendencies that interfered with my judgment, also false. Dr. Walsh was horrified when I showed her the documentation. Sarah, this is systematic sabotage of your career. This goes beyond normal family dysfunction. This is deliberate interference with your professional future. Together, we crafted a response to each medical school. Dr. Walsh provided additional letters of support, detailing her 5 years of working with me and her observations of my emotional resilience and professional competence. She included specific examples: how I'd handled stressful situations in the lab, my calm demeanor during difficult research presentations, my mature response to experimental failures and setbacks. The response from Johns Hopkins came faster than I expected. Dr. Patricia Williams, the Dean of Admissions, called me personally on a Friday afternoon in February. Ms. Chen, I've reviewed your documentation and spoken with Dr. Walsh at length, she began. I need to start by apologizing. We should have contacted you directly when we received concerning information from your mother, rather than treating it as a standard reference. That was a failure on our part. I held my breath, waiting for the rejection I was sure was coming. However, after reviewing everything, your academic record, your research contributions, Dr. Walsh's detailed assessments, and the unfortunate family situation you've documented, our admissions committee has reached a unanimous decision. My heart was pounding so hard I could barely hear her next words. We'd like to offer you a position in our incoming class, with a full merit scholarship covering tuition, fees, and a living stipend. Your research background is exactly what we're looking for in our physician-scientist track, and your handling of this difficult situation demonstrates the kind of professionalism and resilience we want in our students. I was quiet for so long that Dr. Williams asked if I was still on the line. I'm here, I managed. I can't believe this is happening. Additionally, she continued, we'd like to offer you a research position in our cardiac surgery lab, working with Dr. Michael Torres on proteomics research. Dr. Walsh shared your published work with him, and he's very interested in continuing that research direction with you. After I hung up, I sat in my dorm room staring at my phone. I'd gone from thinking my medical career was over to receiving a full scholarship at one of the nation's top medical schools. And the opportunity to work with Dr. Torres, whose research I'd been following for years. The other schools followed suit. Harvard offered admission with significant financial aid. Stanford extended an interview invitation with a note apologizing for the miscommunication regarding my application. Mayo Clinic not only offered admission but invited me to their selective research track program. But Johns Hopkins felt right. Dr. Williams had handled the situation with professionalism and genuine concern for me as both an applicant and a person. Dr. Torres's research aligned perfectly with my interests. And frankly, after what I'd been through, the full scholarship felt like validation that my achievements were real and valuable. The hardest part was deciding how to handle my family. I'd accepted that my mother would never be truly supportive, but I hadn't expected active sabotage of this magnitude. Dr. Walsh suggested I meet with a counselor to process the situation, and I'm grateful I took her advice. The counselor, Dr. Lisa Park, helped me understand that my mother's behavior wasn't about concern for my well-being, it was about control. As long as I believed I wasn't capable of major achievements, I'd remain dependent on her validation and guidance. My success in medical school would represent a level of independence and recognition that threatened her position in my life. What she did wasn't just unsupportive, Dr. Park explained. It was a deliberate attempt to sabotage your future. That's not normal family concern. That's sabotage motivated by her own psychological needs. Armed with this understanding, I made a decision about boundaries. I would tell my family about my acceptance to Johns Hopkins, but I wouldn't discuss the circumstances or give them opportunity to undermine this achievement. I called my parents on a Sunday evening in March. I wanted to let you know that I've been accepted to Johns Hopkins Medical School with a full scholarship, I said simply. There was silence on the other end. Then my mother's voice, tight with something I couldn't identify. That's wonderful, honey. I'm sure you'll do fine. My father was more enthusiastic, genuinely proud and excited. But I could hear my mother in the background, and I knew she was already formulating ways to diminish this achievement. Sure enough, within minutes she was expressing concerns about the workload, the stress, whether I'd be able to handle living so far from home. I'll be fine, Mom, I said firmly. I'm very well prepared for this and I have excellent support systems in place. After I hung up, I felt a strange combination of sadness and relief. Sadness that my mother couldn't simply be proud of my achievement. Relief that I finally understood her behavior well enough to protect myself from it. The real consequences for my mother came gradually, through social channels I hadn't anticipated. Word spread through our community about my Johns Hopkins acceptance and full scholarship. Neighbors, family, friends, and relatives began congratulating my parents on their daughter's incredible achievement. My aunt threw a small celebration dinner, inviting extended family to honor my acceptance. But as people learned more details, that I'd been accepted to multiple top programs, that I'd received significant research opportunities, that I'd essentially earned a free medical education at one of the world's best institutions, they began asking my mother more pointed questions about her earlier comments. My aunt later told me that several relatives had mentioned my mother's previous statements about my being too anxious for medical school, her concerns about my emotional stability, her suggestions that I should consider less demanding career paths. Now those comments looked not prescient, but deliberately undermining. People are wondering why you are so negative about Sarah's abilities when she's clearly exceptional, my aunt said during one of our regular phone calls. Especially after the Johns Hopkins news came out. It doesn't look good, honey. My mother's book club friends, her church group, her neighbors, they'd all heard her express concerns about my career choices over the years. Now they were seeing those concerns completely contradicted by objective measures of success. The cognitive dissonance was uncomfortable for everyone involved. The most significant consequence came from an unexpected source. My high school guidance counselor, Mrs. Patterson, contacted me after hearing about my medical school acceptance. She wanted to congratulate me, but she also had something concerning to share. Sarah, I don't know if you remember, but your mother contacted me several times during your senior year expressing concerns about your college aspirations, she said. She suggested you might be setting unrealistic goals, that you might not be emotionally equipped for pre-med studies. I noted those conversations in your file and frankly they influenced some of my advice to you. I did remember Mrs. Patterson suggesting I consider backup plans, and encouraging me to apply to less competitive colleges. At the time, I'd assumed she was just being realistic about admissions odds. Given your incredible success, I've been reviewing those interactions, and I realize I may have inadvertently limited your opportunities based on incorrect information from your mother. I wanted to apologize, and I also wanted to ask if this pattern of interference has continued. When I explained what had happened with my medical school applications, Mrs. Patterson was appalled. She also mentioned that she'd been in contact with other guidance counselors in our district, sharing best practices for supporting high-achieving students. My story had become a cautionary tale about the importance of independent verification when family members express concerns about students' capabilities. We're implementing new protocols to ensure this doesn't happen to other students, she told me. No family input will be considered without direct confirmation from the student, and we're training counselors to recognize signs of family sabotage. Meanwhile, I was thriving in my preparation for medical school. Dr. Torres had invited me to join his research team early, working on projects over the summer before classes began. I was contributing to grant applications, helping design experiments, and learning surgical techniques I wouldn't normally encounter until much later in my training. Dr. Williams checked in with me regularly, ensuring my transition was going smoothly. The Hopkins community had embraced me completely, and I was finding mentors and friends who supported my ambitions without reservation. For the first time in my life, I was surrounded by people who saw my achievements as exciting rather than concerning. My mother's attempts to contact the medical school continued sporadically. Dr. Williams's office forwarded me a few messages where my mother had called expressing ongoing concerns about my adjustment to medical school. Each time, the admissions office would note the call, thank her for her concern, and then delete the message without taking any action. "We flagged your file early on," Dr. Williams explained. "Any communication from your family members gets filtered through our office first. You're an adult, and your educational journey is between you and the institution. We don't accept third-party interference, especially when we have documented evidence of previous false information." 6 months into medical school, I was excelling beyond my own expectations. My grades were strong, my research was progressing well, and I'd been selected for additional leadership opportunities. Dr. Torres was including me in grant applications as a key personnel member, and I was presenting research at national conferences. The validation from the medical community was overwhelming in the best possible way. These were people who understood the rigor of medical training, who could assess competence objectively, who had no reason to diminish my achievements. When they said I was performing exceptionally, I could believe them. My relationship with my family reached a new equilibrium. I maintained contact but with clear boundaries. I shared general updates about my progress but didn't seek their validation or approval. When my mother made concerning comments about my stress levels or workload, I simply redirected the conversation. The most rewarding moment came during my first year when Dr. Williams invited me to speak to prospective students about the Hopkins experience. During the Q&A session, a young woman asked about handling family pressure and expectations around medical school. "Sometimes the people closest to us aren't the best judges of our capabilities," I said carefully. "Trust the objective measures. Your grades, your test scores, your research contributions, the assessments of mentors who understand the field. Those are more reliable indicators of your potential than family opinions, especially if those opinions seem designed to limit rather than support your aspirations." After the event, Dr. Williams pulled me aside. "That was beautifully handled. You've turned a difficult personal experience into wisdom that can help other students. That's the kind of insight that will make you an excellent physician." As I finish my second year of medical school, I'm preparing for my clinical rotations with excitement rather than anxiety. My research with Dr. Torres has resulted in 2 more publications, and I've been invited to present our findings at the International Conference on Cardiac Surgery. My grades consistently place me in the top 10% of my class, and I've been selected for the Honor Society in several leadership positions. More importantly, I've learned to trust my own assessment of my capabilities. The voices in my head now belong to mentors and colleagues who've seen my work and believe in my potential. When challenges arise, and they do because medical school is genuinely difficult, I have a support system that helps me problem solve rather than questioning whether I belong here. My mother still occasionally makes comments about the stress of medical school or wonders aloud whether I'm taking care of myself emotionally. But those comments no longer have the power to undermine my confidence. I know objectively that I'm thriving, that my professors respect my work, that my research is contributing to important medical advances. The full scholarship from Johns Hopkins didn't just pay for my education. It provided validation that my achievements were real, substantial, and worthy of investment. When one of the world's leading medical institutions chooses to invest in your future, it's hard to argue that you're not capable of success. I recently received an email from Mrs. Patterson, my high school guidance counselor, with an update that made me smile. She'd implemented new protocols in her department, and they'd identified 3 other students whose families had been systematically undermining their academic aspirations. With proper support and objective assessment, all 3 were now attending competitive universities and thriving. "Your story changed how we approach family dynamics in academic counseling," she wrote. "We're now trained to recognize sabotage disguised as concern, And we're much better at protecting students from this kind of interference. You've probably helped dozens of students you'll never meet. That feels like the best possible outcome from a painful experience. My mother's sabotage not only failed to derail my career, it ultimately led to stronger support systems for other students facing similar challenges. Sometimes the most devastating betrayals create opportunities for the most meaningful victories. Next year I'll begin my clinical rotations in cardiac surgery. Dr. Torres has already arranged for me to observe several procedures and assist with research projects in the cardiac unit. My dream of becoming a cardiothoracic surgeon feels not just possible but inevitable, supported by mentors who believe in my abilities and an institution that has invested in my success. The girl who once questioned her own competence because of her mother's constant undermining has become a medical student whose research is changing cardiac surgery protocols. The transformation didn't happen overnight, but it was absolute. And it started with one phone call from a dean who chose to believe in my potential rather than my mother's sabotage.